I'm not ashamed.
What is a parable? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Matthew on walking through the Bible.
Honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Matthew chapter 13. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 9. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Matthew chapter 13, beginning at verse 1. On the same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the sea. And great multitudes were gathered together to him, so that he got into a boat and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. Then he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places, where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up, because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. But others fell on good ground and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. By the language used in verse 1, the context for the majority of chapter 13 will be a continuance of that from the end of chapter 12. So far in this book, Matthew has divided his gospel into sections. In the first 4 chapters, we saw the birth of Jesus and his early ministry. In chapters 8 and 9, we saw many of his miracles. While his miracles certainly continued, chapter 10 through 12 saw more of Jesus' short discourses and the growing animosity between him and the Pharisees. Although this animosity will continue to grow throughout the rest of this book, here in chapter 13, Matthew focuses on the many parables taught by Jesus by the sea. By my count, Jesus told 31 parables as are contained in the Gospels. This count may vary depending on what people count as parables, but at the very least, he told 31 major parables. These parables are mainly told in Matthew and Luke, with Mark only containing 4 parables, while John containing none. Of the 7 parables told in this chapter, 4 of them are found in Matthew's Gospel alone, while the other 3 are found in either Mark or Luke. A parable literally means cast alongside something else. In this case, Jesus' stories were cast alongside a spiritual truth. Usually, though not always, Jesus started a parable with the kingdom of heaven is like, in order to teach a spiritual truth about the kingdom of heaven, something abstract, using a familiar type of story which will best illustrate his point. We teach children this way, using stories in order to show them about harder concepts like love, hate, fair play, obedience, and things like that. Doing this helps visualize harder concepts using things that we see every day. Jesus' parables thus heavily focus on farming and money lending, topics that the people of that day frequently were involved with. If Jesus walked the earth today and taught in parables, although his lessons would be the same, I'm sure he'd be using examples that would be pertinent to our culture. Because of the major differences between 21st century culture and first century culture, it might lead some to think that Jesus' parables have gone the way of Shakespeare, in that they are hard to understand. But such is only the case if we let it be the case. Men and women still farm today, even if we don't do it the same way, and people still lend and borrow money. So these parables are relatable, even to us today. In the first parable, we have what is known as the parable of the sower. A sower is simply someone who goes out and plants seeds. Today we think of planting as when someone digs a hole and places a seed in a hole, covers it with dirt, and waits for the plant to grow. We don't usually plant indiscriminately, meaning that we cultivate the ground before planting and try to provide the best soil possible for the plant to grow. In Jesus' day, that's not how planting was done. A sower would have a bag of seed, and he would go out into the field and scatter the seed as he walked. The seed would land on the ground, and depending on where it landed, it would either grow and produce, or it would not. In this parable, we have seed landing on 4 types of ground. We have wayside ground, rocky ground, thorny ground, and good ground. The wayside ground is ground that is heavily walked upon. When I see pictures of it for children, it is often shown as asphalt, and while this would certainly be true today, and easier to illustrate for children, in Jesus' day, what he was talking about was dirt that was heavily traveled on and compacted. We would call this a dirt path today. When the seed landed on it, it couldn't sink into the ground, and the birds came and ate it. Some of the seed fell in stony ground, dirt that had stones in it. The dirt was soft enough for the seed to sink in, but because it was stony ground, there wasn't a lot of dirt, so the plant couldn't place deep roots in order to tap into the underground water. The sun scorched the plant, and it withered and died. Some seed fell in thorny ground, so the seed sank in, created roots, but later was choked out by the thorns that grew in with it. And then some seed fell on good ground, ground that where the seed was able to sink in, establish roots, grow, and produce fruit. Some produced different amounts of fruit, but the point is that the good ground plants all produced fruit. We'll discuss Jesus' meaning of the parable later on in the chapter, so for now, he who has ears to hear, let him hear this parable. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Matthew 13, verses 10 to 17, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not ashamed.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.